Okay, so for those who are just joining the recording, I just gave a little bit of a background about who I am. Again, Alona Shaked, women's executive and lifestyle coach. And I was just introducing my former client and friend, Maggie Blackburn, who I've now known for a year and a half, who's made a transformative journey from I won't say like being like slogging the 9 to 5 exactly, but sort of feeling like, hey, who am I outside of this 9 to 5 job, or not really 9 to 5, more like a 9 to 7, which is more realistic these days in our culture. But who am I outside of this? What's really important to me? What do I want to create out of my life? And what do I want to have long term for myself? So um, with that being said, I would love, oh, hang on just a second. I just want to make sure I can see this. Okay. So I would love to start talking with Maggie about how she made that transition. So let's kind of start at the beginning with some history. Maggie, if you wouldn't mind sharing, can you tell me about the early years of your career? So how did you decide what it was you were going to do when you grew up, and how did you feel about that, before we started meeting?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, hello everyone. It's nice to be here, and I see some spaces that I know or names that I know. But I think for me, like going through like high school, it was always just the goal was to get into like a decent college and that sort of thing. And I think for me, it was like I'm gonna choose business because all my friends are in that major, and I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do yet, for the rest of my life, quote unquote. So I kind of chose business because in that major you could choose like a concentration a little bit later. And that's sort of how I picked like what I wanted to do. Like when I was in college, I I kind of like experimented with marketing and I actually liked that a little bit more, but like ultimately I concentrated more on like information systems, which is basically like databases and a little bit more technical, which looking back is definitely not me, but it's just something that I knew or I thought that could help me get into, a good internship and a good job after college and that sort of thing. So, yeah, that's sort of how I chose it based on
Yeah.
friends.
And I
Yeah.
think that that's probably a common story for many of us. I know that that resonates with me. For example, like I kind of have the similar story where I chose to study psychology in undergrad, which actually has served me well with what I do now. But when I graduated from college, I had no idea what I wanted to do and was like, well, lawyers make a lot of money. That sounds good. And I think that the baby boomer generation, our parents' generation, there's just a lot of emphasis placed on being a certain way and kind of like fitting this mold that is deemed successful. And that's like you're either a lawyer, a doctor, a business person. Maybe now it means like you work in a big tech company. But there's not a lot of room to color outside of those lines. And I think a lot of us kind of choose where we first start out based on other people's expectations and not necessarily based on like a deep understanding and intuition of who we are and what our purpose is. So I told you guys already about my aha moment. Getting diagnosed with breast cancer was sort of like, oh, hey, you need to wake up and, smell the coffee and decide whether or not this is what you want to be doing. But tell me about your aha moment, Maggie. I want to know like when you sort of were like, this is not working for me. And I think I'm going to actually do something about it.
For sure. Like, I feel like I had a little bit of like two of those because I think for a lot of people with COVID, we had sort of an aha moment around like, just our lifestyle changed and a lot of things changed. So I think that was like my first aha where I had gotten to a point where I was telling myself during COVID, like, I'm just going to keep working because there's nothing else to do. Like, I can't go outside and that sort of thing, which sort of led me to burnout in the job that I had. I was working at Slack at the time, and it was just like very much like, okay, we're, working on a big launch, and I was just working like crazy hours. And that was the first point where I was like, okay, I definitely need like a break. But I didn't really consider changing anything. Like I didn't change anything really. I was just like, I just need some time to myself and I need like a break. But I think after Slack, we kind of got acquired or going through that. And so I jumped to another tech company, to Asana. And I think the aha moment there was also working really hard and then kind of like looking back and feeling a little bit not really valued at the company that I was at, like having a kind of difficult conversation with a previous manager and just feeling really like sad, I would say, about kind of like what I was doing with my life. Even though there were great things going on outside of work, it was just sort of like, what am I doing? Like, do I want to do this for the rest of my life?
Yeah, and I mean, you have always had like a thriving social life and, a really close connection with your family. So it wasn't that like the parts outside of work were that there was like any issue with it, but it was sort of like in terms of what do I want to do with my life? What is the legacy that I want to leave here on this planet? What do I want to be spending my waking hours doing? Like I think that that sort of was what was coming up when we first started talking. And then of course, as many of us can attest to, whenever we have a difficult manager at work, that can just make things so much harder because, like, your day to day is based on the stress of dealing with that person. So I think that that's also a factor, and that can really impact many people. So, okay, so that's when you first started kind of realizing. And what did you do about it? Like, what were some of the initial steps that you took to try to address these feelings of discomfort you were having?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it was trying to figure out kind of, well, one, I think I knew that like jumping to another tech company wasn't going to necessarily like solve the issue. So for me, it was like, sure, I can go and I can apply to a bunch of jobs and I can kind of like do that and maybe see where it goes. But I just didn't think that was going to like solve everything. So what I started to do was reach out to people on LinkedIn. Um, Kind of, yeah, just a network, but also trying to see if I wanted to get a new job and that sort of thing. So I found a few folks that were pivoting kind of to like consulting and that sort of thing, or starting their own company, and that really intrigued me. Mostly folks that were in like product marketing. And I met a previous client of yours, Julia, through that. And she had told me her story around like how she had worked with the coach and how she basically went from product marketing at a company where I don't think she saw like a long-term career path doing that, to figuring out that she wanted to do more of like, or like at least start and test like a corporate retreats business, which sounded really cool and sounded like such a big pivot from like product marketing at like this company to, oh, starting this cool business. And I was like, how did she do it? So I think that's what I started to do, was just talk to a bunch of people and see what they liked about their jobs, like how they pivoted, and that's how I got like introduced to coaching as well.
And I think you're so lucky that you're such a proactive person because I think that a lot of people have that sinking feeling that things are not in alignment and they kind of just ride it out. Especially when they have like golden handcuffs involved, which we're going to get to in a minute. We're going to talk about money mindset. But yeah, so I think it was really innovative of you in a certain way and brave of you to start researching that. And then obviously we connected. And maybe tell me a little bit. I know you mentioned this part about your new manager, but what was kind of like that breaking point for you where you were just like, that's it. Like, I need to actually make a change. I need to invest in this process.
For sure. I think it was like me kind of trying really hard to improve things maybe at the company, or had like new ideas that I wanted to bring in. And, some of those, sure, like kind of were, they weren't implemented necessarily, but they were like acknowledged. And I was like, okay, cool, cool. But like ultimately it was just feeling like none of the things that I was doing was helping. And it was a little bit of like a tricky scenario too, where I think I just got a bunch of unexpected feedback where I was like, oh, I'm trying so hard at this company, but they don't value me. And also, is this even what I want to like be doing? So I think that was a really difficult, like tough conversation for me to have. But also looking back, it's like, okay, that needed to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And sorry, my dog is barking in the background, so hopefully that's not irritating anybody. Um,
No, I don't think I heard
okay,
anything.
great. Yeah, so Tell me, so, and I just want to mention, like, you talked about my former client Julia for a second. So part of like what it is that we do, and part of what I wish would be done with people from the get-go, instead of just being like, all right, like here's, what everyone else is doing, so this is the type of career you should have, is to really sort of like find who you are, like in your spirit. And for Julia, like her spirit was like a camp counselor. I mean, that was who she was, and that's what ended up leading her to start that corporate retreats business. Whereas with Maggie, with you, I felt like there was an entrepreneurial spirit within you, and there is an entrepreneurial spirit within you, where you are just so creative and innovative. And also, you're kind of like a doer, a go getter, where you make things happen. And that part of you wasn't getting satisfied by working in like a corporate, very, very structured job. So let's talk about how we started to uncover that and to like satisfy that. So, um, obviously, at this point, you have started a couple of side hustles, or in fact, businesses. Um, let's talk about how you started to make that transition. Like, let's talk about the first side hustle slash business that you started out. How did you, how through coaching, like how did you identify that that was something that you wanted to do?
For sure. And I'm going to talk about the side hustle, but just one thing too, I think to your point around entrepreneurial spirit and that sort of thing, I think for me going into it, I was like, I didn't know that was a thing for me. And I think for me as well, there was like a lot of indecision, which I think we might talk about, like indecisiveness. And like, I have so many things that I like to do. Like, how are you going to pick one thing? So I think that is just something that I also kind of have learned as well around like for coaching. Um, in terms of like, yeah, in terms of like the side hustles and that sort of thing, I think I was already doing like some sort of Pilates while we were first coaching. So I had done that in San Francisco and I had, yeah, done that in SF and I wanted to do it again in New York. And I was just teaching Pilates, kind of just maybe a few classes per week. And that was like one of the side hustles that I had had like before coaching. And I just wanted to do it in New York to kind of form more of a community, see if I wanted, to do it more and like gain a little bit of money. So I think that's where it first started. Um, but I think at the same time, we talked about another side hustle too, where one thing I was exploring before coaching was just like maybe just doing marketing consulting on the side. So that's something that I kind of explored as well, where I was doing, I decided to like reach out to the Pilates instructor in studio um, that I had and ask her if she needed any marketing help, which ultimately led into like basically my first client. And it's like small business. And I thought, okay, maybe I can do marketing for a small business that I, enjoyed their mission, enjoyed their story too. So that's kind of where things started. And then from there, I got another client, which was like a referral from her, which is like boutique hair salon. I was doing like marketing and social media for both of them. So that was the
Yeah.
first one.
And I have to say, I don't know if probably most people here follow Maggie on social media. If not, we're going to put like her stuff in the chat at some point, and you should. But Maggie, you're so good at marketing. It's just like it puts me to shame. I'm like, I should hire Maggie for marketing. She's amazing.
Can always
So
give yeah, tips or anything, but
yeah,
I
absolutely. So that was kind of like a natural fit for you, right? Because you were working in product marketing, you had that background, and then the Pilates thing was sort of like you were doing that like as a hobby, but then you were like, oh, I could actually make money doing this. Um, how did we start to identify like other opportunities, other goals that you might have? Like, how did we uncover what some of those other ideas and goals were?
Yeah, I mean, one of the most fun parts of coaching, I think, is that like visioning aspect. So there was a lot of different ways that we did that. I think one of my favorite exercises was just like the blind self exercise, I think it was called, but essentially just asking your friends or your family or even your colleagues, like, what are the things that, you think Maggie is like great at and exceptional at, or, what is she gifted at, or, um, things like that, like things around her personality, and that kind of helped me a lot, like I think I have things that I'm self-aware of what I like and I enjoy, but I think that was a great exercise. We also did some like visualizations as well, which is really, really nice. Like kind of meditation, visualization exercises, just like describe like and visualize like what your day looked like, what your world looked like all of those different things that I think it was great because there were a lot of different exercises, so it wasn't just like one. But ultimately we were looking at themes, and I think you were helpful in that, like highlighting what themes came through across all of these. And then ultimately, I think that's when it sort of seemed like, oh, I wanted to work for myself because that wasn't super apparent at the beginning of coaching. It was like an idea, but I don't think it was like a thing yet. And so that was one of the things like, okay, I wanted to work maybe for myself one day. And then that's when we started brainstorming to more like business ideas.
Yeah, and I mean a big part of that was like figuring out, who are you and like what is your purpose and identifying like what your long-term goals are. Like when you get to the end of your life, what are you going to look back and see? And I think getting that clarity for you helped you not just to kind of come up with the ideas of like, okay, so what are some ideas of things that I want to do, but it gives you the strength and empowerment to be like, I'm not going to settle for less than this anymore. And so one of those ideas was about you are a very creative person. So not only are you wear many hats. Not only are you great at marketing and you do Pilates, but you're also really great at design. And at one point, I think we have like a whole matrix where we were putting different ideas for Maggie. One of the things we were thinking about was like interior design, which ultimately we decided against for several different reasons. But something that sort of came out of that was, well, what if I became a property owner and designed my properties to be able to rent them out as vacation rentals? And that was something that really excited you, and that you were like, I could see this being something where like I could build that as like a long-term investment business. And also like I see this as being something that's really fun. So tell me about that and also about your current property.
For sure. I mean, I think that was another big milestone for coaching too. It was like the design aspect, yes, like I definitely love kind of creating beautiful spaces and like thinking about all of that stuff. But I think there was also the mindset around like purchasing the property as well, which we might talk a little bit more about. But like, um, yeah, for me, I think for a while I had wanted to purchase some sort of property. I didn't know. I went back and forth with a lot of different ideas, and I think this is like a common theme with myself. It's like I have to kind of go back and forth, and then finally like I decide on something, and then I'm like, okay, I'm gonna do it. And so that was a similar thing with like purchasing this property. It was um I was looking like all over. I was like, maybe I'll look in Brooklyn, very expensive, but maybe I can rent out a room. Okay, what about out of state? And then I just kept switching my strategies, and I think ultimately it was sort of like thinking about where I was right now at this moment, which I was in New York, and how could I kind of just start now versus like delaying like until I'm ready to do this. Because for me it was something that I had wanted to do for years before coaching. And yeah, obviously you do it and then you learn like a bunch of stuff. So that's kind of what I've been doing for the last, I put on Airbnb in November. So I've been doing that for like learning every season basically up here in New York. It's like a different world. You know, what with summer and then in the winter, like just getting things ready.
So let's talk about some of those harder topics that you brought up, right? So the challenges that you faced in being able to move forward. Like once we identified, okay, these are the things that Maggie wants to do right now. This is the vision. There was a lot of blockage in terms of being able to go from point A to point B. And a lot of that had to do specifically with your mindset, right? So there were I would kind of put like we can talk about two different types of mindsets here. So one of them was, as I mentioned before, money mindset. And I think for a lot of us, that is a huge barrier to breaking out of that baby boomer mold where we're like, okay, financial security is of paramount importance to me. Not all of us are trust fund babies, right? we need to earn a living. Inflation is real. We're all trying to have, decent lifestyle and set ourselves up for long-term security. And there's a huge fear about breaking away from traditional jobs, traditional careers, and companies that may not necessarily be the right fit for us, but that pay very well. So let's talk a little bit about money mindset for a second and how we were able to kind of move from that place of like fear and insecurity, which manifested in the Airbnb as like, I can't spend money on this because what if I lose money, right? Like it was like, what if I make this huge investment and then it's a complete and utter failure and I don't recoup any of the money that I'm spending, right? So Maggie, in your words, how do you think we got you from that place to being able to maybe not being like completely fear-free, right? And I think that that's
Yeah.
something I want to mention. The goal is not for you to eliminate all negative emotions or fears. That's not realistic. It's for you to get back in the driver's seat and decide whether or not you want to keep those fears or thoughts that are driving your current results. So tell me, how did that transition happen for you?
Yeah, I mean, oh, it was like a journey, I think, because it was a lot of, yeah, analyzing, I think, the thoughts that I had around it, like you mentioned. So just like I think a lot of us are probably like, I don't know, maybe a lot, maybe half, I don't know. Or like worst case scenario thinkers where we just think like, oh my gosh, this is gonna happen. And I think like, the worst case scenario or whatever. And I think thinking about that never gonna happen, because I've already been down these 3 other rabbit holes of, like, trying to actually buy a property, and then there's, like, all this fear and all this built up stuff. And so, yeah, I think it was viewing it more of a learning experience for me, and less of, like, a monetary value, and also thinking about, like, the long-term potential of things. Because like, if you don't start something, then you're not gonna learn, and so if you delay that, and let's say I delayed it, another year or 2, it's like, yeah, you never know where you're gonna be. So, I think for me, it was ultimately, like, just telling myself that it was a learning opportunity, and this is something that I really did want to do, and this was really a big goal of mine, so ultimately, I had to, like, do it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think a lot of that is just shifting from this place of it's going to be a disaster and a catastrophe to, well, maybe it'll work out. But even if it doesn't, that's okay because you have to be willing to fail in order to succeed in the way that many of us want to succeed. And gaining that courage is not something that happened overnight or that happens to most of us overnight. Changing our mindset takes a lot of work and a lot of introspection, but also a lot of like looking at where do these values and beliefs that we have come from, and what are some of the wounds that we may have, whether it's from childhood or from our early adulthood, that may be bringing up some of these fears for us, and ultimately empowering yourself and saying, well, I could live my life according to this set of, fears and values and here's where it's getting me and I'm not liking where it's getting me. So, how did you feel after you purchased that property?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was just, yeah, like a sense of, because of that journey, I think it was just like, I can't believe I did it almost. Like, yeah, like that sort of thing. And then you kind of figure things out, I think, with a lot of these things. I think Airbnb is one example, like moving to New York, living by myself, that was another goal that I had wanted to do. It's similar in the sense of like you have a goal and maybe you're delaying it, but then once you do it, you kind of have to like figure everything out. So for me, it was a really big moment in terms of just, yeah, like accomplishing that goal, but also just learning a lot too along the way. And yeah, I get a little bit emotional talking, I think, about just my journey. So apologies if, yeah.
Totally. I mean, it is such an emotional thing to decide what it is that you really want out of your life and then to go for it and to have overcome so much to be able to get there. So we talked a little bit about money mindset and breaking through that fear. But let's talk about also the indecision. That was another piece for you that was a very big challenge. So it was almost like there were too many ideas, right? So it was like, okay, I know I want to do something, extra above and beyond what I'm doing with my 9 to 5, but I have a million ideas. It was like I've got, maybe the Airbnb, maybe an interior designer, the Pilates thing, the consulting thing, all of this stuff. And then of course you also have a very rich social life. And um ultimately we landed, or you landed on a business that I'm really excited for you to share with the group. But I want to talk about that process of indecision and like how it was kind of holding you back from being able to choose anything. So it was almost like there were so many options that you were just paralyzed because you were like, well, I'm always second guessing myself. Well, what if I choose this? And then that means I can't do that. And what if I fail at this? And then that means, that I've lost that opportunity. So tell me about like how that felt for you in the beginning when there was just like so many different directions you could have gone in.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think I did lay them all out. I think what we did was we went through and kind of looked at based on what I wanted for my next job too, like putting them into this like tracker and seeing, okay, like, there's pros and cons to everything. Um, yeah, I think it was similar to what I said before with the indecision thing. It was like, I think a theme that I've been thinking is sometimes I have to think about it a little bit longer and then ultimately like I decide and that's what I wanna do. I think for me, like, looking at some of the options, there are ones that I were, like, kind of excited about, but I think, you know, working with you, Alana, like, you're talking about being an entrepreneur, starting your own business, you kind of have to be really excited about the idea, and I think for some of these, there's something just, like, holding me back. I don't know if it was just, again, that getting started piece of, like, okay, what is an idea that I'm gonna be, like, so excited, and I think like, it doesn't have to be maybe that huge of a thing, but I wanted to be a little bit more excited. So that was kind of maybe what was holding me back, like, against some of the other ideas. But I think ultimately the one that we sort of landed on for this, and I think it's, gonna evolve and that sort of thing. It's like one that combines my interest in traveling and connecting people in like personal and professional growth and just like kind of yeah experience design and that sort of thing, and I think that's how we landed on it. But yeah, it was a little bit of a back and forth between me figuring out what I wanted to start and do.
And I think like one really helpful analogy for people is dating, right? So it's like you're dating people, and especially in today's age where a lot of this is like online dating, there's always so many different options. And it's almost like the paradox of choice, where sometimes there's too many options and it actually holds us back from being able to make a decision. But at the end of the day, dating, sort of similar to entrepreneurship, is like you fall in love with a person and it's not something that you can necessarily explain in words. It's a feeling, it's a vibration in your body, it's an intuition that you have where you're like, this person isn't necessarily perfect, but they're the right person. And so I think, similarly, if we're dating and we have like this list of things that we want out of a person and we're looking for perfection, 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 and we're ignoring this inner part of ourselves that actually really intuitively knows whether we're connecting with that person or not, we land up in that place where there's always going to be the grass is always going to be greener. There's always going to be indecision. Whereas, when we get to that place where we're willing to let go of perfectionism for progress, so progress rather than perfection, which by the way is an unattainable goal, anyways, that's when you can like listen to what's going on inside and really connect with what it is that your heart wants to do. And ultimately, I mean, you can answer this too. Like we did a lot of work where we figured out, okay, so Maggie loves like X, Y, and Z. And, this is a business that's going to incorporate all of those things. And these are the people that she's going to help. And she feels really passionately about this. is it ever 100%? Do you ever feel like it's absolutely perfect?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, I think nothing's perfect. So it's sort of like, yeah, I mean, with every business or job, I'm sure there are things that you're not gonna love doing, but I think ultimately it's sort of like, yeah, the main parts are there, right? I think the main parts are there and it's like you can kind of figure out the rest, I think is what I'm learning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about this idea that this concept that you're developing, the business that you're developing, and how exciting it is for you. Tell us like what it is that your vision is and what it is that you're doing and why you're doing it.
Totally. Like, so I think, going through coaching and doing that for a while, like, I had the Airbnb and kind of launched that, and that took a lot of time, to be honest. I was getting everything ready, the furniture, all of that. And then I kind of came up for air and started coaching again. Actually, I took a pause. And that's when I was like, I want to go more into like starting whatever it was. I didn't really have an exact idea, but like starting the business that I wanted to start. And I think for me, like in my coaching journey and also kind of like after, starting this as well, I think it's nice to have people along the journey as well and like that kind of sense of community. And for me, I think I had, yourself, Alana, which was great, but I think I could have formed a better community during that like journey where a lot of my friends are also great, but they're on the corporate career path or they're, maybe not wanting to change as much or they're like okay and comfortable with it. And so for me it was sort of like, okay, how do I form this community of really like, yeah, ambitious women to do this? And so that was like one of my target audience is kind of like forming folks similar that have gone through similar challenges as myself. And then the other thing was just around trying to incorporate like travel into it. I love traveling just to different countries and that sort of thing. I had a birthday, like my 30th birthday last year in Mexico, and that was a lot of fun, like where it kind of felt like a retreat in itself because I had like planned the whole itinerary of what we're going to do. And it was just like, again, that connection aspect that was really shining through. And yeah, I mean, I think it was all of those elements to me where I was like, okay, I want to plan like a retreat and I want it to be this sort of audience. And I want it to kind of solve similar challenges that I have gone through and also for like myself as well. Like, let's form a community of folks who are building towards something. And that's kind of how it started. And yeah, I can share more details, but it's in Tulum at the end of October, October 24th to 28th. And it is going to be like a blend of some of these different workshops to kind of like help build towards that purpose-driven business. And I'm partnering also with a coach that's located in New York. And it's also going to be kind of like wellness based as well. Like I might teach a Pilates class, for example. We'll have some yoga and meditation in the mornings and also like good food as well throughout the retreat and activities. So it's not just business. It's definitely a time to kind of sit with yourself, invest in yourself, and kind of grow as well in community.
Yeah, I mean, I cannot understate the importance of having community in these types of transformations. Like, obviously, private coaching, which is mostly what I do, is very helpful. But at the same time, like having that community supporting you. And I mean, like every day, something new can come up. And, coaching is great, but like as you know, it's like there's always going to be curveballs. There's always going to be days where you wake up and you're like self-doubt, questioning yourself again. And having that community is really what ensures that you're going to have the ability to just move forward with this in the long run and be so supported by others. Not to mention that just retreats are amazing. And I am so sad that I'm not going to be, I have two little babies at home. I'm not going to be able to go on this retreat this time, but I am like so looking forward to one of Maggie's next retreats that hopefully I will get to be a part of in the future. And all I can say is that this woman knows how to plan stuff. So if you're looking for an incredible experience that you're not only going to get something out of, like practically speaking, if you're like looking to start a side hustle or a business, or just to like uncover what it is that you really want to do. I think this is an amazing way to do it. And it's also just sounds like it's going to be a very relaxing and fun experience. So, yeah, I am so excited for you to do that. And I guess I just want to ask you a few more follow-up questions.
Yeah.
So first of all, before we end this, and we'll have time for some questions if anyone has questions for either me or for Maggie at the end, and we'll put links to contact information in the chat. So like if you're interested in the retreat, or if you just want to follow Maggie on social media, um, that we'll give you guys all the links for that. But just a couple of follow-up questions. So we focused a lot on your transition through, in career. And obviously, I look at each woman as like a holistic person. It's not just about your career. And some of the issues that we resolve, like the indecision, the money mindset, all of those types of things, how did coaching impact the other aspects of your life outside of starting your own business or your work at Asana, for example?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is around the mindset piece because your mindset does touch more than just your career and that sort of thing. Like with coaching, I didn't really think, oh, like going into it, I'm gonna go and like purchase a house. Like that wasn't like a goal. But I think because we worked on the mindset and thought realistically about what goals I had in my life, I think that's something that was accomplished there. I mean, I think, the same could definitely be applied to like dating scenarios and things like that. Like just again, there's not like a perfect person, and that sort of thing. And I think you do have to kind of keep putting yourself out there and that sort of aspect, which applies. And I think, I've learned a lot around like just like career job searching too, as well, like how to view work in a different way. I think for me, I was just viewing it so personally. And I think, now I can view it a little bit more just like objectively of like, this is my job and I'm doing the job, but kind of there are so many other aspects of life as well. So
Yeah,
yeah.
awesome. So, what advice do you have for somebody who is facing similar challenges? Like for a woman who maybe is here who is like, hey, I've got this, 9 to 5, 9 to 7, 9 to 9 job, and I'm just feeling like something's missing. Or maybe it's even worse than that. Maybe it's like I am in dire straits. I am like really not happy with what it is that I'm doing. What advice would you give that woman right now?
Yeah, I mean, I was definitely like there last year. I think, yeah, just thinking about it. I also get emotional because it was like I was there like crying each week because of work, because of not really knowing what I wanted to do, having this like existential crisis in some sort. But I think for me, sorry, it just like naturally comes out, but I'm fine. For me, it's like, yeah, you're at the right place. I think just exploring and having the right questions. I think, coaching is one route to do it. There's a lot of different ways to, kind of heal your mindset or like think about that. I think reaching out to people to learn about their journeys is something that I started with. And so I would love, for you all, if we haven't chatted one-on-one, I'm happy to chat one-on-one about anything that I talked about today or anything that you're going through and all of these different things. So happy to do that. But I think it's just sort of starting, like you have the awareness, maybe that there is something more that you want from your life. And that's great. And now it's sort of like looking at all the options and deciding what you want to do. Yeah. Like what you want to do about it, I suppose. Because
Yeah.
yeah, I think one thing is you do have to take some sort of action if you want something to change.
Yeah, and I think like when you're coming from that place of vulnerability and fear in the beginning, having that extra safety net, that sense of support, whether it's working with a coach or like joining a community of other women who can be supportive in that situation, that can be so invaluable because it can help you be able to take those leaps knowing that you're not doing it alone and that you're not going to free fall, that there are people there who are supporting you, who can help catch you, that it's not, that yes, it's a risk, but it's not an unsafe, uncalculated risk, if that makes sense. So we're going to close the conversation in a moment. I know that people are starting to have to jump. But I guess just one last question for you. So tell us, like, what's next for you? Like, what is, I mean, obviously we have your retreat that's coming up, and
Yeah.
tell us what's next and how folks can get in touch with you.
For sure. So, I mean, there's a lot of things going on, I think, as usual. But I think for me, it's sort of um continuing to like, yeah, plan this retreat, I think is one thing. I think the other thing is looking for more like maybe aligned roles, whether it be contract roles, maybe it be, other roles that aren't necessarily either in the exact like product marketing field that I'm in, like getting more exposure and I would say like professional experience for like events and community is something that I'm looking to do, or just like looking also for maybe a smaller company where you can kind of like get that more entrepreneurial sort of spirit and build as well. So I think I'm just exploring a few different options there and kind of building that. And yeah, just like maintaining and building slowly over time. I think like the Airbnb that I've done. I'm also trying to plan a few events as well. Like a few in-person ones would be great, like in New York. But I also did like a panel recently where I interviewed some friends and colleagues about how they started their purpose-driven business. So just more like resources and like things to bring folks together, I think is what I'm looking to do next.
Awesome. Okay. Well, while we are closing up, Maggie, why don't you go ahead and just drop your links in the chat, maybe like your Instagram, LinkedIn, and then whatever link you have to people to like book a conversation with you to talk about the retreat, or if there's like a retreat landing page, I think that would be great.
Yeah.
And then just from my end, I just want to say it has been such a privilege to have been part of your journey and to work with you. And like I said, I look forward to attending one of your retreats at some point. Your transformation has been really inspirational, and I'm just excited to see like the beautiful things that you bring into this world, a world that really, really needs that right now. So yeah, and then obviously I also just want to let everyone here know that if you are looking for more support, the retreat is obviously a great place to start. I am also accepting new private clients. So if you want to just chat, um, tell me about your story, tell me about what you're facing. I do offer free initial consultations. So I'll drop a link for that also in there, as well as my social media if you want to connect with me. And I'm happy to just kind of listen to your story and see what I think might be the best fit for you, whether it's working with a coach, what kind of coach that might be, or what type of action you could potentially start to take. And sometimes that's not working with a coach. Sometimes it's therapy, which is very different from coaching, right? And therapy is often a great thing to have in tandem with coaching as well. Okay, so with that being said, I do want to just, if there's anyone who has any like specific questions, should we just, if people want to, you can put your questions in the chat. And if there aren't any questions, we'll just wait a moment and we can close it up. But yeah, feel free to jump in, anyone, if you have anything that you'd like to ask.
Yeah, you could put it on the chat or come up mute, either one.
I just wanted to thank both of you, Alona and Maggie, for your transparency and wonderful questions and responses. I also do have to jump, but I wanted to ask one question before I did, and that was, I think so much of what Maggie shared is something that's systemically built in, like a lot of it's cultural, and Alona, you also affirmed that. I'm just curious, are there certain tools you guys use in terms of daily practices and things that help you or remind you, like to ground you in the life choices you've made? Is it, I don't know if it's like meditation, prayer, I don't know, like just day-to-day tools that you guys use? Because I often find it that it's really in some ways good, like easy enough to vision cast and to have these like long-term aspirations, but it's really the day-to-day that can be the most challenging, especially when you start to, as you mentioned, like self-doubts. And so sometimes having these routine things that you do is really helpful. So I'm curious if there's any tools you guys use on a daily basis.
Juan, do you want to go
Yeah,
first? And
you can go first if you want, and then I'm
okay.
happy to jump in.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that I enjoy, like I'm a visual person, and it was fun kind of creating was like a little vision board that I just put on my phone background, and it's just sort of there like on a the daily basis where I have like kind of just values that I want to embody, and then also some goals on there as well, like I have, I don't know if I you can maybe see it, I don't know, but I and my phone screen's a bit cracked, but I have like things like you can kind of see it, like I wanted to go to Peru, and then like Brazil, you can't really see it, it's blurry, but like the house, the retreat, the planning a family trip for my family, like things like that I'm like visualize. So I really like doing that. And then whenever I feel like a bit overwhelmed, I just try to take a moment and just, take a few breaths and meditate in a sense. But when I find myself even like, drifting off, I'll kind of do that and just bring myself back.
Yeah. So I'll tell you what I sort of like recommend for clients, and then I'll tell you specifically what I personally do to help me with that. So you kind of hit the nail on the head when it's like you can have this great plan and know what you want to do, and you're like your mindset's all there and you're ready to do it. And then life happens, and it's like, I don't know, for me, it's like my kid gets sick and has to stay home from daycare for a day, or like you get fired from a job or laid off, or something happens, and curveballs are just like a part of life. And even just like, I don't know, hormones, like some days we wake up and we're just not motivated. So how do you execute or perform even when life is happening? Because ultimately it's not just about like having an idea of getting to point B, like you want to get to point B. So a couple of things. I mean, I do really think that mindfulness practices are very helpful. They're evidence-based. I mean, it definitely shows that it will help you be like more centered, more productive, all of those things. That being said, and I love, giving people meditations. It is very difficult for me to meditate. And I think that's true for a lot of people. So mindfulness doesn't necessarily have to be in the form of sitting down and doing a meditation. If that works for you, then great. And if not, there's a couple of other things that you can do. So, one of the things that I have my clients do is like a weekly reflection, basically. So it's, I call it intentional calendaring, but the idea is to sort of like have some, goals in mind for like what you'd like to accomplish for the week, some intentions. And then you sort of sit down and figure out like intentionally, how do I want to be spending my time this week? What is going well in my life? What is troubling me in my life? And really just kind of like centering yourself, and then thinking about how you're going to deal with any challenges that come up, and really just sort of connecting again with your why, with your vision. Another way you can do that is by doing something like what Maggie just showed you. It's sort of like infusing your vision or your why, or your purpose into places where you're more likely to be reminded of it. So it could be like your screensaver, it could be your password, it could be, just like a voice note. Like I used to have a fear of going to doctor's appointments after I went through cancer, and I literally had like mantras that I recorded on my phone. And when I would drive to doctor's appointments, I would listen to that in the car, and it would completely change the way that I would approach the situation. So I think a lot of it is just like infusing your values, your mindset, and what we sort of call the soul compass, but that's the idea of like your purpose and who you are and what it is that you want to do, and just continuously always reconnecting with that. So yeah, so I think that there's like a lot of different ways to do it. It's definitely like an individual thing. Like most important is what I would say is it doesn't matter what you do, it just matters that you do it consistently. So even if you pick something out of all the things I just said, which isn't even everything I could recommend, but if you just pick one thing that's like I'm going to change my passwords to like a word that reminds me of my goal. Or, you know, every day I'm just going to like take 3 deep breaths and recenter myself. I would rather people do something that's like super small, but consistently do it rather than try to take on a bunch of things and do that for like a month and then completely just fall off. So hopefully that is somewhat helpful and answers your question.
So helpful, really great. And thank you so much again for this time together.
Yes.
Thank you for
You guys are
coming.
very welcome. So yeah, if anyone has any other questions, both of our contact information is in the chat. And I think maybe Maggie, you maybe will send like a follow-up email where we can include those details as well. And other than that, thank you all so much. Thank you, Maggie. Yeah.
Yes, thanks, Alana. Thanks everyone who came as well.
Thank you so much. Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
Really inspiring. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.